The train screamed into Willow Creek, a beast of iron and steam tearing through the quiet New Mexico air. It was 1878, and the sun beat down on Owen Blackwood's hat like a hammer on an anvil. He wasn't supposed to be here, not today. But a telegram had arrived, urgent and cold. His father's medicine was on this train, a special package from back east. Without it, the old man might not see another sunrise. As the locomotive hissed to a stop, Owen's eyes skipped right over the mail car. He was looking at a woman stepping down from a passenger coach. She wore a dress the color of deep forest emeralds, and the way she moved, deliberate and poised, made his heart kick against his ribs. It was a strange, violent feeling. She looked up, and for just a second, their eyes locked across the dusty platform. A jolt went through him, not just attraction, recognition, a bone-deep feeling that he knew her, that he'd been waiting for her, which was impossible. He'd never seen this woman in his life. She looked away first, her face hidden by the brim of her hat as she moved toward the station house. "Mr. Blackwood," the station master called out, breaking the spell. "Your package." Owen tore his eyes away, accepting the small brown parcel. It felt strangely light in his hands. He looked back, but the woman in green was gone, swallowed by the crowd. A hollow ache opened in his chest, a sense of loss for a complete stranger. He had no idea, not a clue, that this brief, impossible moment of connection was the start of a nightmare that would threaten to burn his entire world to the ground. He thought he was just picking up medicine for his father. He was wrong. He rode the 10 miles back to his ranch with the woman's image burned into his mind. The Blackwood spread was his whole world, 5,000 acres of prime grazing land his father had carved out of the wilderness 30 years ago. Now his father, James Blackwood, was a shadow in a sickbed, and Owen was fighting to hold it all together. His foreman, Samuel Wilson, met him at the corral. Samuel had been with them for a decade, a former Union soldier whose gaze missed nothing. "Took you a while, boss," Samuel said, his eyes knowing. "Anything interesting in town?" Owen just grunted, swinging down from his horse. "Just the medicine." But Samuel had already heard the whispers. "Tom Jenkins rode out," he said with a low chuckle. "Said you looked like you'd seen a ghost at the station, a real pretty one in a green dress." Owen just shook his head and pulled the parcel from his saddlebag. He took it straight to his father's room. The old man was frail, his breath shallow, but his eyes were still sharp. "You got it, son?" he whispered. Owen nodded, tearing the string off the brown paper. He opened the box, and he froze. It wasn't medicine. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a single dead black rose, and underneath it, a small folded piece of paper. Owen's hands shook as he opened it. There were only 4 words written in a precise, elegant script. "She knows you're there." Owen stared at the note, the blood draining from his face. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message, a threat, and it had arrived with the woman in the green dress. Suddenly, her impossible flicker of recognition felt less like fate and more like a warning. 2 days passed in a haze of fear. Owen told no one about the black rose. He told his father the medicine had been delayed, a lie that tasted like ash in his mouth. He sent an urgent telegram to the doctor in Santa Fe, but he knew it was a waste of time. Whoever sent that package wanted him to feel helpless. They wanted him to know they could reach his father any time they chose. He spent his nights sitting by the old man's bed, a shotgun across his lap, watching the shadows. His mind kept returning to the woman from the train. Was she the one who sent it? Or was she the one the message was about? "She knows you're there." Who was she? And who was you? His father? Or him? On the 3rd day, desperate for supplies and a sense of normalcy, he rode into town. He was at the counter of Jensen's general store when the bell above the door jingled. The air went out of his lungs. It was her, the woman from the station, Up close, she was even more striking. Her hair was the color of rich chestnuts, and her eyes were a deep, intelligent brown. She was asking Mr. Jensen for directions to the property office. "I understand a Mr. Richardson handles land transactions," she said, her voice smooth but with an edge of something weariness. Jensen pointed the way, and she nodded politely. Then her eyes found Owen. She saw him staring, and a faint blush touched her cheeks. He felt like a fool just standing there, so he tipped his hat. "Ma'am," was all he could manage. She gave him a small, fleeting smile and turned to leave. Every instinct screamed at him. He couldn't let her go. "Miss," he called out, his voice rougher than he intended. "Richardson's office. It can be tricky to find." She paused, turning back. Her eyes were evaluating him, searching. "That's very kind, mister." "Owen Blackwood," he said, stepping forward. "Malene Foster," she replied. The name meant nothing to him, but as she said it, her eyes darted away for a split second, a micro-expression of something. Was it fear? He offered to walk her there, and to his surprise, she accepted. As they stepped out into the dusty street, Owen felt like he was walking into a trap. He just didn't know if she was the bait or the hunter. He had to find out what she was doing in Willow Creek. He had to know if she was connected to the black rose that was sitting in his desk drawer like a ticking bomb. They walked down the main street, the silence stretching between them. Owen decided to break it. "Just arrived in Willow Creek, Miss Foster?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes," she said. "I was on my way to Santa Fe, but circumstances changed." The hesitation was there again, a wall she put up just before she spoke. "Willow Creek has its charms," Owen said, testing her, "though they're not always obvious." A real smile touched her lips then. It changed her whole face. "And what are its hidden charms, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked. He found himself telling her about the people, the land, the way the mountains looked at dawn. He was talking more than he had in months, and he didn't understand why. It felt easy. Too easy. They reached Richardson's office. He should have just said goodbye and walked away, but he couldn't. "If you need any help," he said, the words tumbling out. "My ranch is 10 miles west of town, the Blackwood place. Anyone can direct you." He was offering help to the very person who might be threatening his family. "That's very kind," she said, her expression softening. "Perhaps our paths will cross again." Owen watched her disappear into the office, his gut twisting into a knot. His orderly life was over. He knew it. What he didn't know was that Malene Foster wasn't there to see Richardson about buying land. She was there to see him about a deed, a very old deed, a deed to the Blackwood Ranch. The ride home was a blur. His mind replayed every word, every glance. Malene Foster. The name echoed in his head. Who was she? And what did she want with the property office? He thought about the black rose, the note. He thought about the flicker of fear in her eyes. It didn't add up. When he got back to the ranch, Samuel was waiting, his face grim. "Boss, you better come see this." He led Owen not to the house, but to the river that marked the southern border of their land. Floating in a shallow eddy, snagged on a rock, was a waterlogged traveling case. Samuel had fished it out. Inside, the clothes were ruined, but a small oilskin pouch was still intact. Owen opened it. There were letters, a handful of coins, and a small leather-bound diary. The name stamped in faded gold on the cover made Owen's blood run cold. It wasn't Malene Foster. It was Eleanor Vance. Owen spent the night in his study, the diary open in front of him. The handwriting was neat, the entries telling a story that made his skin crawl. Eleanor Vance was a governess from Boston, hired by a wealthy family to travel with them to Santa Fe. But the last entry was written in a panicked scrawl, dated the day before the train arrived in Willow Creek. He found me. I don't know how. I have to get off the train. I have to disappear. He said he'd kill me. He said he'd kill anyone who helps me. Owen slammed the diary shut. The woman calling herself Malene Foster was really Eleanor Vance. She was running for her life, and Owen had just painted a target on his own back by offering to help her. The black rose wasn't a warning for his father. It was a warning for her, and now for him too. The next morning, a rider came from town. It was Edgar Richardson, the property agent. The man rarely left his office unless big money was involved. He got straight to the point. Owen, the old Cameron place, the one that borders your northern pasture. You wanted to buy it last year. Owen nodded. The land had the best water access in the county. Well, it's been sold, Richardson said, mopping his sweaty face. An offer came in yesterday. Paid in cash. Eastern money. A cold dread settled in Owen's stomach. He knew the answer before he asked the question. The buyer, it wasn't a Miss Malene Foster, was it? Richardson's eyebrows shot up. How'd you know? Yes, that's her, representing some big investment company out of Boston. Said she's planning to visit the property tomorrow. Asked me specifically if any neighbors might be willing to show her the boundaries. It was a lie, all of it. The investment company, the Eastern money, maybe even the name Malene Foster. It was a cover story, a way for Eleanor Vance to hide in plain sight. But why here? Why buy the Cameron Ranch of all places? It was 1,000 acres of scrub and rock, worthless to anyone except a neighbor who wanted the water rights, unless there was something else on that land, something no one knew about. Richardson was still talking, hinting that Owen should ride over and be neighborly. Owen just nodded, his mind racing. He had to see her again. He had to confront her. He had to know what kind of danger she had brought to his doorstep. He agreed to meet her at the Cameron place the next morning, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. He had no idea how right he was. The Cameron Ranch held a secret buried for 30 years, a secret his own father had helped to bury. And Eleanor Vance had just arrived with the shovel. He rode out at dawn, the air crisp and cool. He found her waiting by the dilapidated Cameron cabin, dressed in a practical riding habit. She looked less like a frightened governess and more like a woman with a purpose. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for coming." Richardson was there too, but he made a flimsy excuse about appointments in town and left them alone with suspicious speed. "Shall we ride?" Owen said, his tone clipped. He needed answers. They rode in silence for a while, Owen pointing out landmarks in a detached voice. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. They were on a high ridge overlooking both their properties. He reined in his horse and turned to face her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and hard. "Your name isn't Malene Foster." She didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. "No," she said softly. "It's Eleanor Vance." She told him everything. About the man she was running from. A powerful, ruthless man named Harold Winthrop. He had been her father's business partner. After her father died under mysterious circumstances, Winthrop had tried to force her to marry his son, Charles, to gain control of her inheritance. When she refused, he'd threatened her. She'd fled, using a false name and the last of her money to buy this remote, forgotten piece of land. "But why here?" Owen demanded. "Why the Cameron Ranch?" She hesitated, then her eyes met his. "Because my father told me to come here if I was ever in trouble. He told me there was something hidden on this land, something that could save me. He gave me a map." Before Owen could process this, a rifle shot cracked through the air. A splinter of rock exploded from the ledge next to his head. He reacted on pure instinct, grabbing Eleanor and pulling her off her horse, tumbling down the rocky slope into a thicket of junipers. Another shot whizzed over their heads. They were pinned down. "Who was that?" Owen hissed, pulling his own revolver. "It's him!" Eleanor whispered, her face pale with terror. "It's Winthrop's man. He followed me." They were trapped. A lone gunman on the ridge above and miles of open country in every direction. Owen realized with a sickening lurch that this wasn't just about Eleanor's inheritance anymore. This was about the secret of the Cameron Ranch, a secret someone was willing to kill for, and he was right in the middle of it. They waited, crouched in the scrub brush, the silence stretching until Owen's nerves were raw. The sun beat down, and sweat trickled down his back. The gunman was patient. He knew he had them trapped. Owen looked at Eleanor. Her fear was real, but underneath it was a core of steel. She wasn't just a damsel in distress. "The map," Owen whispered. "Where is it?" She reached into the bodice of her riding habit and pulled out a small, folded piece of oilcloth. She handed it to him. It was old, the ink faded, but the lines were clear. It showed the Cameron property, but with markings that made no sense. There was a drawing of a lone cypress tree, a series of numbers, and a single word: Anvil. Anvil Rock, Owen breathed. He knew the place. A strange rock formation on the far edge of the property. His father had always told him to stay away from it, said the ground was unstable. Another lie. As dusk began to settle, they made a desperate plan. Owen would create a diversion, drawing the gunman's fire while Eleanor made a run for the horses. It was a stupid, suicidal plan, but it was the only one they had. Owen took a deep breath, gave her a nod, and burst from cover, firing his revolver toward the ridge. The rifle above them roared in response, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. He saw Eleanor break for the horses out of the corner of his eye. He kept firing, zigzagging through the rocks, praying she would make it. He heard a horse scream, then the thunder of hooves. She was away. Now it was just him and the man on the ridge. He found cover behind a thick slab of granite, his heart pounding. He had 3 bullets left. The rifleman had him pinned. Night fell completely, bringing a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Hours passed. Owen knew the man was still there, waiting. Then he heard a sound, not from the ridge, but from behind him. He spun around, his revolver raised. Samuel stepped out of the darkness, a shotgun in his hands. "Figured you might need some help, boss," he said calmly. Eleanor had made it back to the ranch and sent him. Together they planned a new attack. Samuel would circle around, coming at the gunman from the flank, while Owen provided covering fire. The plan worked. Caught in a crossfire, the gunman panicked and fled into the night. They didn't get a good look at him, but as he disappeared, something fell from his saddlebag. Owen picked it up. It was a silver flask engraved with the initials H.W. Harold Winthrop. They rode back to the Blackwood Ranch under the cover of darkness. Owen took Eleanor not to the main house, but to a small, hidden line shack deep in the property. It was too dangerous for her to be seen. He confronted his father the next morning, laying the map on the old man's blanket. "What is this, Dad? What's at Anvil Rock?" James Blackwood's face went pale. He looked ancient and defeated. "I promised I'd never tell," he whispered. He told Owen the story. 30 years ago, he and Eleanor's father, Daniel Vance, had been partners. They'd discovered a rich vein of silver on the Cameron property. But they knew a discovery like that would bring chaos and violence. So they concealed the mine, creating a false map and agreeing to leave it untouched, a secret legacy for their children in case of dire need. They had a third partner, a young, ambitious man who invested with them, a man named Harold Winthrop. But Winthrop grew greedy. He wanted the silver all for himself. There was an argument, a fight at the mine entrance. Daniel Vance was injured, and in the confusion a dynamite charge went off, sealing the entrance to the mine. Winthrop left both men for dead. James Blackwood managed to crawl out, but he was badly injured. He thought Vance was dead. He never knew his partner had survived and escaped back to Boston. He'd lived with the guilt for 30 years, and now Winthrop was back to claim the treasure he'd been denied. "The mine isn't the only secret, son," James said, his voice trembling. "Winthrop didn't just want the silver. He knew Vance was a genius with breeding stock. The real prize wasn't in the ground. It was in the bloodlines Vance was developing. Hardier cattle, resistant to disease, worth more than any mine in the long run. Winthrop wanted it all." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Eleanor's story about the Foster Agricultural Investment Company wasn't a complete lie. It was a twisted version of the truth. It was her father's company. Winthrop had stolen it after he thought Daniel Vance was dead. Now he wanted the last piece of the puzzle, the research and the location of the secret mine that Daniel had hidden on the Cameron Ranch. And Eleanor was the key. Owen went back to the line shack, his world turned upside down. Eleanor wasn't just a woman in trouble. She was the heir to a legacy his own father had been part of. Their lives were intertwined in a way he could never have imagined. He found her cleaning a rifle, her movements efficient and sure. She was no helpless governess. "My father taught me to shoot before he taught me to read," she said, not looking up. "He always said you never know when you'll need to defend what's yours." Owen laid the flask on the table. "Winthrop," he said. Eleanor nodded. "I knew he wouldn't send some hired gun. He's too arrogant. He'd want to be here himself." The game had changed. This wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about fighting back. It was about taking back what was stolen from her and uncovering the truth of what happened to both their fathers 30 years ago. "He thinks the mine entrance is sealed," Owen said. "My father told me it was." "He lied," James Blackwood said from the doorway. He was leaning on Samuel, looking weak but determined. "There's another way in, a back entrance. Only Daniel and I knew about it, and it's on your land, Owen, not the Cameron place. Winthrop has been looking in the wrong spot for 30 years. The map was a decoy. The real entrance was on Blackwood property. This was why his father had always been so protective of that specific patch of land. It was also why Winthrop needed the Cameron Ranch, not for the mine itself, but as a base of operations, a foothold from which to launch his attack on the Blackwoods. He was playing a long game, trying to acquire the neighboring land legally before making his move. Eleanor's arrival had just forced him to speed up his timeline. They had a choice. They could run, or they could set a trap. "He wants the mine," Eleanor said, her eyes blazing with cold fury. "Let's give it to him." The plan was audacious. They would use the decoy map, the one Eleanor had, to lead Winthrop to Anvil Rock. But instead of silver, he would find a reception committee waiting for him. Samuel gathered the most trusted ranch hands, men who had been with the Blackwoods for years. Owen's father, despite his weakness, insisted on helping, poring over old maps and pointing out the best ambush spots. Owen and Eleanor spent the day preparing, the shared danger forging a bond between them that was stronger than time. He saw her not as a woman to be protected, but as an equal, a partner. He was falling for her, hard, and the feeling was terrifying because he knew it could get them both killed. They sent a rider into town with a message, a carefully crafted piece of bait. The rider let it slip at the saloon that Owen Blackwood had found something strange on the Cameron property and was heading out to Anvil Rock at dawn to investigate. They knew Winthrop, or his spies, would hear it. That night, Eleanor came to Owen as he was checking his rifle for the 10th time. "Owen," she said softly, "if something happens tomorrow—" "Nothing will happen," he said, his voice tight. "Don't." She stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. "My father, in his last letter, told me to trust the son of James Blackwood. He said your father was the most honorable man he ever knew. He said a Blackwood's word was worth more than gold." Owen looked at her, at the trust in her eyes, and felt the weight of his father's legacy settle on his shoulders. He leaned in and kissed her, a desperate, urgent kiss that was both a promise and a farewell. They were in position before the sun crested the mountains. Owen, Samuel, and 5 of their best men were hidden in the rocks around the Anvil Formation. Eleanor was with Owen's father, watching from a high ridge a mile away, a spyglass in her hand. As the morning light spilled into the canyon, they saw them. 2 riders. It was Winthrop himself, and a younger man Owen assumed was his son, Charles. They rode with an arrogance that made Owen's blood boil. They dismounted near the rock, pulling out Eleanor's map. "It should be here," Winthrop said, his voice carrying in the still air. "A sealed cave entrance behind this rock." Charles kicked at the base of the rock formation. "There's nothing here, Father. The girl lied to you." "She didn't lie," Winthrop sneered. "She just doesn't know the whole story. Her father was a fool. He thought this pathetic map would protect his little treasure." That was the signal. "Now," Owen said. His men rose from the rocks, rifles leveled. "Looking for something, Winthrop?" Owen called out. Winthrop spun around, his face a mask of shock, then rage. He and Charles drew their pistols, but they were hopelessly outgunned. "Blackwood," Winthrop snarled. "I should have known your father would produce a meddling fool of a son." "Drop the guns," Owen commanded. Charles looked terrified, but Winthrop was defiant. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, his eyes glittering with hate. "I own this territory. I own the law." "The law in Willow Creek has a name," a new voice said. Sheriff Miller stepped out from behind a boulder, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "And it seems to me you're trespassing." Owen had sent a rider for the sheriff last night, telling him just enough to get him interested. Suddenly, Charles made a break for it, firing wildly as he scrambled up the rocks. Samuel, ever the marksman, fired a single shot from his rifle. It didn't hit Charles, but it struck the rock just above his head, sending a shower of stone chips down. Charles screamed and dropped his pistol, surrendering. Winthrop, seeing his son's cowardice, seemed to deflate. His arrogance crumbled, replaced by the bitter certainty of defeat. It was over, or so Owen thought. As Sheriff Miller was cuffing Winthrop, the man looked past Owen, a strange, triumphant smile on his face. "You think you've won, boy? You're too late." From the ridge where Eleanor and his father were watching, a single shot rang out. Owen's heart stopped. He turned and saw, through his own spyglass, his father slumped over in the saddle. Eleanor was trying to help him, but there was another figure there. A third man, who had been hiding on the ridge the whole time. It was the gunman from their first encounter. Winthrop had a backup plan. "My best man," Winthrop said with a laugh that was half a sob of relief. "He'll finish the girl and the old man, and there won't be any witnesses." Owen didn't hesitate. He leaped onto his horse, screaming Eleanor's name as he galloped toward the ridge. Samuel and the others were right behind him, leaving the captured Winthrops with the sheriff. It was a race against time, a mad dash up the steep trail. He could hear Eleanor screaming, then another gunshot. He spurred his horse harder, his mind a red haze of terror and rage. He burst onto the ridge to a scene of chaos. The gunman had Eleanor by the hair, a pistol to her head. His father was on the ground, a dark stain spreading across his shirt, but he was alive, conscious, trying to raise his own revolver. The gunman was backing away, dragging Eleanor with him toward the cliff edge. "Stay back, or she dies!" he shouted. Owen skidded his horse to a halt, raising his hands. "Let her go," he said, his voice shaking. "It's me you want." "Winthrop pays me to finish jobs," the gunman snarled. "And the job is to eliminate all the Vances and all the Blackwoods." From the ground, James Blackwood coughed, blood on his lips. You won't get away with this," he gasped. The gunman laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Old man, I already have." But he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated Eleanor. In that split second, while his attention was on Owen and his father, she drove her elbow back, hard, into his gut. The gunman grunted in surprise, his grip loosening for just an instant. It was all she needed. She twisted away, dropping to the ground as Owen fired. The bullet took the gunman high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He staggered, lost his footing on the loose scree, and with a final desperate cry, he tumbled over the edge of the cliff. Owen ran to Eleanor, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight. Samuel and the others arrived, and they immediately tended to his father. The bullet had gone through his side. It was bad, but if they could get him to the new doctor in town, he might just make it. They brought Winthrop and his son back to town in chains. With the testimony of Owen, Eleanor, and the Blackwood ranch hands, their fate was sealed. But the real victory came from a dusty old ledger they found in Winthrop's saddlebags. It detailed 30 years of crime, extortion, theft, even the admission that he had bribed a doctor to cover up the accidental death of Daniel Vance. He had also been slowly poisoning James Blackwood for months, using a contact at the Santa Fe pharmacy to replace his heart medication with a slow-acting toxin. The black rose wasn't a warning. It was a taunt, a symbol of his slow, creeping victory. It was all there, in his own arrogant hand. He had documented his own downfall. James Blackwood survived. The new doctor, a young man with steady hands and a sharp mind, said he was lucky. Another month of that poison and he would have been gone, the doctor told Owen. With Winthrop's assets seized, Eleanor was able to reclaim her father's company. She found that her father's research on cattle breeding, which Winthrop had tried so desperately to find, wasn't on the ranch at all. It was in the one place Winthrop would never look, coded and disguised as poetry in the flyleaf of the diary she had carried with her the whole time. The secret to a fortune was hidden in plain sight. A few months later, as spring began to breathe life back into the high country, Owen stood with Eleanor on the ridge where they had almost died. His father, recovering well, was back at the ranch, already making plans with Samuel to combine the Blackwood stock with the principles from Daniel Vance's research. "I thought I was coming here to hide," Eleanor said, looking out over the vast expanse of land. "But I think I was really coming here to find my home." Owen took her hand. "We found it together," he said. He had the deed to the Cameron place in his pocket. She had signed it over to him that morning. In return, he had handed her a different document, a marriage license. They were married by the end of the week in the small church in Willow Creek. The whole town turned out. James Blackwood stood beside his son, proud and strong. As Owen watched Eleanor walk down the aisle, he thought about that day at the train station. The impossible feeling of recognition. Maybe it hadn't been a warning. Maybe it was something else entirely. The feeling of a story finally finding its beginning. They had faced down a conspiracy 30 years in the making, uncovered a secret that bound their families together, and fought for their lives. And now, their real adventure was just starting. It just goes to show you that sometimes the most ordinary day, a simple trip to the train station, can be the first step into a story so wild you wouldn't believe it if it wasn't true. And sometimes, the person you think is a stranger is the one person you've been waiting for your whole life. If you enjoyed this story of secrets, survival, and justice in the Old West, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You never know what dusty old secrets we'll uncover next.